It was a bright morning in the city. People were walking fast, heading to work, holding coffee cups, and talking on their phones. The streets were busy, and everyone seemed to be in a hurry. A woman stood quietly on the sidewalk. She looked around, holding her small black purse tightly. Her name was Miss Evelyn. She was a black woman in her mid-50s. She wore a plain brown coat. Her shoes were clean but old, and her hair was tied back neatly. She looked simple, too simple for this rich area. In front of her stood a tall glass building. It had shiny doors, golden letters, and security guards at the front gate. The name of the building was More Towers, Private Corporate Offices. Evelyn took a deep breath and walked toward the entrance. A security officer saw her coming. He was a white man in his early 40s. His name was Officer Rick. He stood up straight, narrowed his eyes, and crossed his arms. "Excuse me," he said, loudly, "you lost or something?" Evelyn looked at him kindly. "No, I'm here for a meeting on the 24th floor. Rick raised an eyebrow. "A meeting? On the 24th floor? With who?" Evelyn reached into her purse. "I have my ID right here. I can show," but before she could finish her sentence, Rick stepped in front of her. He looked her up and down, from her coat to her shoes. "Lady, do you even know what this place is? This isn't a public library." People nearby turned to watch. Some whispered, a few chuckled. Evelyn stayed calm. "I do know what this place is. I come here often." Rick laughed loudly. "You come here often? Are you trying to clean the floors or something?" Evelyn's hand shook slightly as she pulled out her ID card. "Please, just look at this. My name is Evelyn Moore. I have business here." Rick snatched the card from her hand. He didn't even look at the photo or the name. Instead, he held it up and shouted, "This is fake. Do you really think you can fool us?" Then, with one sharp motion, he tore the ID card in half and threw it in the trash. Gasps came from people nearby. Evelyn's face turned pale, but she didn't cry. She stood still, shocked. "That ID is real," she said softly. "You made a big mistake." Rick leaned closer and whispered, with a smirk on his face, "The only mistake was letting you stand here too long." He pushed the glass door behind him and pointed away. "Now leave. Before I call the cops." Evelyn looked into his eyes. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue, but her voice was steady. "You don't know who I am, but soon, you will." Rick laughed again. "Oh, I know exactly who you are. A woman trying to look important, but not fooling anyone." As Evelyn turned to walk away, someone nearby had been watching the whole time. A young janitor stood by the sidewall. He wore simple clothes and held a mop. His name was Andreth. He had seen Evelyn before many times, but she had never entered from the front. She always used the side elevator, the one only executives used. Andre frowned. Something wasn't right. He looked at Rick, then at Evelyn walking away slowly. Just then, Evelyn stopped near a bench. She sat down, took out her phone, and made a short call. She said only 5 words. "Activate level 1. Right now." Then she hung up. Back at the building, Rick smiled proudly. He stood tall, telling his coworker what he did. "I caught a liar today," he said. "Tried to enter with a fake badge. These people think they can walk in anywhere." His coworker just nodded, not saying much. Rick didn't notice that behind him, Andre was quietly making a phone call of his own. "Hey," Andre whispered. "That lady. She's not just anybody. She's Evelyn Moore." "Yes, the owner." I think Rick just made the biggest mistake of his life. Meanwhile, Evelyn wasn't sitting anymore. She had walked around to the side of the building. There was a private door, no sign, no label. She took out a second ID card. It was golden and shiny. She scanned it. Beep, the door opened. Evelyn walked in slowly. The hallway was quiet and clean. A security camera followed her. As she stepped inside the private elevator, she pressed the button for the 24th floor. The doors closed. Upstairs, in a big glass office, a man in a suit was sitting at a desk. He was Evelyn's personal assistant. His phone buzzed. He picked up and heard her voice. "Call the legal team. Get the video footage. I want everything from the front gate." "Yes, ma'am," he replied. "Also," she added, "get Officer Rick's file ready. I want it on my desk." He paused. "Right away. Miss Moore, downstairs?" Rick was still talking. He had no idea what was coming. He didn't know about the cameras. He didn't know about the backup ID. And he didn't know that the woman he just insulted owned the entire building, the business, and even his job. As Evelyn stepped out onto the top floor, her heels echoed on the marble floor. She walked to her office, passing staff who stood up quickly when they saw her. Her face was calm, but inside, she remembered every word, every insult Rick had said. She sat at her desk, looked out the window at the city, and said softly, "Some people learn the hard way." Officer Rick stood at the front entrance, still proud of himself. He thought he had done the right thing. He thought he had kept the building safe. People walked in and out of the glass doors. Some gave Rick strange looks. Others whispered quietly, but Rick didn't care. He laughed and said to his coworker, "She really thought she could fool me, wearing that old coat like she belonged here." Behind him, the janitor Andre was still thinking about what he saw. He remembered Evelyn's face, calm, strong, silent. She wasn't scared. Even when Rick tore her ID, Andre had worked in this building for over 3 years, and he had seen Evelyn many times. She never spoke much, never acted like a boss. But everyone who knew her respected her deeply. That's why Andre was sure. She's not just any visitor. She's someone important. Andre picked up his phone again. He called the HR office and asked one question. Is Evelyn Moore in the building today? The answer made his heart beat faster. Yes, she just checked in on the private elevator. Andre looked toward Rick, who was still bragging. He whispered to himself, you messed with the wrong woman. Upstairs, the top floor. Evelyn walked calmly through the large hall. The floor was quiet. Expensive paintings hung on the walls. Every staff member stood up when she passed. Good morning, Miss Moore, they said. She gave a soft smile and nodded. Her personal assistant, Maya, was waiting at her office door. Everything is ready, Maya said. We have the camera footage. Legal team is standing by. Evelyn stepped into her office. It was large, with glass walls, wooden floors, and a view of the entire city. She sat at her desk and said softly, send Officer Rick's file, and tell security to stay calm. I'll handle it myself. Downstairs, trouble begins. Rick was eating chips and laughing when his phone buzzed. It was a message from building management. Report to the 24th floor. Immediately, Rick frowned. Why are they calling me up there? His coworker said. That's the executive level. You sure you're not in trouble? Rick laughed. They're probably going to thank me. In the elevator, as the elevator moved up, Rick checked himself in the mirror. He fixed his uniform, straightened his badge, and smiled. But deep inside, a small voice whispered, what if something's wrong? He pushed the thought away. I did nothing wrong. She had a fake ID. The truth is revealed. The elevator dinged. Rick stepped out onto the 24th floor. The hall was quiet. Too quiet. He walked past expensive artwork and gold-framed photos. He stopped at a door with a nameplate. Evelyn Moore, CEO and founder. Rick's face turned pale. No way. Maya opened the door. She's waiting for you. Rick stepped inside slowly. There she was. Evelyn sitting at her desk. Calm, powerful, silent. Rick couldn't speak. Evelyn looked at him, eyes steady. She pushed a button, and a screen lit up. It showed the video of what happened earlier. Rick shouting, Rick tearing her ID, Rick calling her a liar. And Evelyn's calm reply, you've made a big mistake. Rick's hands started shaking. I didn't know who you were. Evelyn stood up. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't shout, but her words were sharp. You didn't need to know who I was to treat me with respect. Rick lowered his head. I'm so sorry. Evelyn walked to the window and looked outside. Do you think this is the first time this has happened to me, or to people who look like me? Rick didn't answer. Evelyn turned back and said, you judged me, you mocked me, you destroyed something that didn't belong to you, and now, there are consequences. Rick stood frozen in front of Evelyn's desk. He had just realized that the woman he insulted, shouted at, and embarrassed, was the owner of the entire company, his boss's boss, the same woman whose ID he tore in half, the same woman he forced out of the building like a stranger. Evelyn sat down slowly and looked at him. Her voice was calm but cold. You looked at me and saw a poor black woman. You didn't see a CEO. You didn't even see a human being. Rick opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Evelyn raised her hand to stop him. I don't want excuses. I want you to understand something. She pressed a button. Another video started playing on the screen. It showed Rick bragging to his coworker about kicking her out. His words echoed in the quiet room. She thought she was somebody. I showed her she's not. Rick lowered his head in shame. The unexpected offer of Ellen paused the video. Then she said something Rick never expected. I'm not going to fire you. Not yet. Rick looked up in shock. You're not? No, she said. Instead, I'm going to give you a choice. Rick blinked. He didn't understand. A choice. Evelyn nodded. You can either leave now, or you can spend the next 30 days working under me, cleaning, serving, and learning from the people you think are less important. Rick looked confused. You want me to be a janitor? Evelyn leaned forward. Yes, just like Andre, just like the workers you ignore. You will mop floors, take out trash, clean the bathrooms. Rick swallowed hard. But why? Evelyn stood and walked toward the window. Because the problem is not just your attitude. The problem is how you see people. She turned to face him. I want to see if you can change. A silent room. The office went quiet. Rick looked down at his shoes. He had never felt so small. All his pride gone, all his confidence crushed. He whispered, and if I do it? Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Then maybe, just maybe, you'll earn a second chance. But if you quit halfway, you're out. Forever. Rick didn't speak. He looked at Hurley, looked at Hurl for the first time. Not as a woman on the street, not as someone beneath him, but as the owner, as a woman full of strength and mercy. The decision of Aline gave him a file. Inside was a paper labeled Temporary Assignment, Building Service Worker, 30 days. Sign it, she said, or walk out. Rick stared at the paper. His hands shook. He knew the job would be hard. People would laugh at him. People would treat him the way he treated others. But deep inside, something in him whispered, you need this. You need to change. He picked up the pen. Slowly, he signed. Rick stood in the cold basement locker room. He looked at the blue janitor uniform lying on the bench. It had no badge, no shiny buttons, just a name tag. Rick temporary staff for a moment. He just stared at it. Is this really happening? He whispered. Yesterday he was in charge. Today he would clean bathrooms. He slowly put on the uniform. It didn't feel right. It felt humbling. Enter Andre. The janitor he ignored as Rick walked out of the locker room. He heard a familiar voice. You ready? It was Andre, the janitor. The same man Rick used to walk past without a word. Today, Andre was his supervisor. Rick nodded slowly. Yeah, I guess. Andre handed him a mop and said, let's see how much you really want this second chance. The long, hard day begins. Rick's first job was cleaning the lobby floor. People stared at him as they walked by. Some security guards laughed. One whispered, look at Mr. Big Shot now. Rick kept his head down. He scrubbed. He mopped. His back started to hurt. His hands became sore. Then came trash duty. He had to clean out bins full of food, spilled drinks, and crumpled papers. The smell made him gag, but he didn't stop. He remembered Evelyn's words. If you quit halfway, you're out forever. Rick starts to see what he ignored as the day went on. Rick noticed things he never saw before. Andre helping an older woman carry heavy boxers, a young cleaner getting yelled at by someone, and still smiling a worker fixing a broken light without anyone saying thank you. These people worked hard every day, quiet, invisible, just like Evelyn had been. That day he judged her. Rick felt something heavy in his chest. I was blind, he thought. All this time, I was blind. An unexpected break at lunchtime. Rick sat alone near the service elevator. He didn't have much of an appetite. Suddenly, Andre sat beside him and handed him a sandwich. Rick was surprised. Why are you being nice to me? Andre smiled. Because someone gave me a second chance once, too. Rick looked at him. You? Andre nodded. Yep, I was like you. Thought I was better than others? Until I lost everything. Rick lowered his eyes. I'm sorry for how I treated you. Andre patted his shoulder. Don't say sorry. Show it. Earn it. A surprise at the elevator later that day. Rick went to clean the executive elevator, the same one Evelyn had used. As he bent down to wipe the metal buttons, the door opened. Evelyn stepped out. She saw Rick in the janitor uniform. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Rick didn't speak, but Evelyn gave a small nod and walked on. Rick felt something in that silent moment. Not hate, not pride, just respect. Rick arrived at the conference room exactly at 9 a.m. He was nervous. He wore the same blue janitor uniform. His eyes looked tired. His hands were still sore from mopping, but something inside him felt different. I need to face this, he told himself. He slowly opened the large glass door and froze. The room full of faces. Inside the room were all the people Rick had once ignored, disrespected, or laughed at. Andre, the janitor, the receptionist. He once shouted at the cafeteria lady he always looked down on the mailroom. Boy, he used to call slow. Even the security guard he once pushed past without saying hello. They were all seated in a circle, and in the center of the room, Evelyn. She sat calmly, hands folded, watching him. Rick hesitated at the door. Should I run? He thought, but Evelyn spoke softly. Come in, Rick, take a seat. The circle of truth. Rick sat down slowly. No one smiled. No one greeted him. Evelyn stood and said, today is not about punishment. It's about facing truth. She turned to Rick. These people, your coworkers, were once invisible to you. Today you will hear their voices. She nodded at the receptionist. Carla. Carla looked at Rick and said, you never looked me in the eyes. Every time I tried to help you, you snapped at me. I went home crying more than once. Rick looked down. His throat felt tight. Then came Luis, the mailroom boy. You called me slow, but I have a learning condition. I work twice as hard just to keep up. Rick's eyes watered. Next was Marta, the cafeteria lady. You threw your tray one day because your coffee was cold. You didn't even say sorry. One by one, they spoke, and Rick listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't defend himself. He just listened. Tears welled up in his eyes. Rick breaks his silence when they were done. Evelyn looked at him. Do you have anything to say? Rick stood up slowly. His voice was soft. I didn't know how blind I was. I didn't know how much I hurt all of you. I'm sorry. Not just for what I did, but for how I thought I was better. He looked around the room, tears now on his face. You all do so much, and I never saw it. But this week, I did. And it changed me. A small sign of hope. The room stayed silent. Then Andre nodded. I believe you. Carla wiped a tear. I hope you really mean it. Evelyn walked to Rick and said, you have 25 days left in your training, but today was the most important test. She handed him a folder. Rick opened it. Inside was a simple message. Growth begins with humility. The next morning, Rick arrived at the address Evelyn gave him. It wasn't a fancy office. It wasn't a tall building with glass doors. It was a small community dealt quiet and hidden between rundown streets. A sign outside read, Hope, Center Shelter for the Homeless. Rick looked around. Children sat on the steps. A woman held a baby wrapped in a towel. An old man coughed into his shirt. Rick's heart sank. Why did she send me here? His new supervisor inside, a short, kind-faced woman, greeted him. You must be Rick. I'm Miss Tanya. Welcome to the Hope Center. Rick forced a smile. What exactly am I doing here? She handed him gloves and an apron. Cleaning rooms, serving food, and listening. People don't just need things here, they need kindness. Rick nodded slowly. I'll try my best. The work is heavy but the stories are heavier. Rick began sweeping the hallway. But everywhere he looked, he saw pain. A boy with a bruised face. Hiding behind his mother, a teen girl crying quietly into her knees. An old man who spoke to no one at lunch. Rick served soup. A man with torn clothes whispered, "Thank you. This is the first warm food I've had in 3 days." Rick didn't know what to say. He just nodded. His hands were working, but his heart was changing. One story that shattered him later while wiping tables. Rick heard a quiet voice behind him. Are you a cop? He turned. A boy maybe 10 years old stood there, holding a stuffed toy. Rick shook his head. Not anymore. Why? The boy looked down. Cops took my dad. He was crying. They didn't listen when I said he was sick. Not bad. Rick froze. The boy whispered. They just shouted at him, like he was dirt. Rick couldn't breathe. That moment, those words. It felt like someone punched his soul. He saw himself in the story. He had done the same thing. To Evelyn. Rick Brackstrick walked outside behind the building. He leaned against the wall, and for the first time in years, he cried. Not small tears, not silent ones, but deep, shaking sobs. He cried for what he used to be, for who he had hurt, for how blind he was. And most of all, he cried for the people he never saw. A voice behind him as Rick cried. A voice came from behind. It hurts, doesn't it? It was Miss Tanya. Rick wiped his face. Yeah, it really does. She nodded. That means your heart is waking up. She handed him a small notebook. Write what you feel. Sometimes, healing starts with words. Rick opened it. On the first page, someone had written, "Those who fall can still rise." Cliffhanger ending that night, Rick walked home. His body was tired, but his soul was awake. He opened his phone and sent a message to Evelyn. Thank you for sending me here. I understand now. I really do. She replied just 3 words. Then prove it. Rick looked up at the stars. I will. Rick returned to the company after 1 full week at the shelter. He was no longer the same man. He smiled more. He listened when people spoke. He even greeted the janitors by name. But not everyone was happy to see him back. The snake in the office there was one person who still hated Rick. Mr. Daniels, the assistant director. He always wanted Rick's position. And now that Rick was trying to change, Daniels didn't believe it. People like him don't change, he told others. He's just acting for show. Daniels began to collect old files, reports, and video clips, anything that showed Rick being rude, harsh, or unfair. He had a plan. I'll expose him in front of everyone. That'll end his second chance. The trap is set. 2 days later. Evelyn called for a team meeting. Everyone from the office, officers, staff, cleaning crew, reception was there. Rick sat quietly in the back. That's when Daniel stood up. Before we begin, I have something to show, he said with a fake smile. He plugged in a USB and played an old security video. On the screen, Rick could be seen shouting at the receptionist, Carla. Then another clip played Rick mocking a janitor. Gasps filled the room. Rick lowered his head. Daniel smiled and said, "This is the man you're giving a second chance to. He doesn't deserve to be here." Rick says nothing. All eyes were on Rick, but Rick didn't fight back. He didn't defend himself. He stood and said quietly, "Those videos are real. I was that man, and I'm ashamed. But I've worked hard to change, and if I must leave to prove I'm serious, I will." Silence filled the room. Even Daniels didn't expect that answer. Evelyn stands up then. Evelyn slowly stood. Her voice was calm but firm. "Thank you, Rick. That's all I needed to hear." She turned to Daniels. "And thank you for showing us who Rick used to be. Because now, we can clearly see who he is today." She looked around the room. You don't judge a person by the worst moment in their past. You judge them by what they do after. People began to nod. Andre stood up and said, "Rick helped me clean the toilets without complaining." Carla added, "He apologized to me in front of the whole team." Even the cafeteria lady smiled. "He helped me carry trays when my back hurt." A shocking decision. Evelyn looked at Rick. "You passed the final test. Your second chance is now your new beginning." She handed him a small badge. It said, "Community Director, People and Outreach." Rick's eyes widened. "Me. Are you sure?" Evelyn smiled. "Who better to lead people than someone who learned to see them?" Rick followed Evelyn's sister down the quiet hallway. He was confused, nervous, and curious. "What do you mean she's hiding something?" he asked. The woman stopped and said, "You respect Evelyn now, but there's more to her strength than you know." She handed him an old photo. In it, Evelyn was wearing a nurse uniform. She stood next to a small boy in a wheelchair. Rick looked closely. "Who's the boy?" the woman whispered. "Her son?" A past she never shared. Rick's eyes widened. "Evelyn has a son." The woman nodded slowly. His name was Daniel. He passed away 10 years ago, after being mistreated in a hospital. Rick was speechless. "What happened?" she continued. "A security officer didn't believe she was his mother. He judged her by her skin, her clothes. They delayed treatment. By the time help came, it was too late." Tears filled Rick's eyes. Evelyn had lived the same pain he had once caused. That day at the office, Rick remembered the day he tore up Evelyn's ID, how he mocked her, ignored her words, and pushed her aside. Now he realized he had become the very kind of person who once hurt her the most. Rick confronts Evelyn. Rick walked into Evelyn's office slowly. She sat near the window, reading papers. He didn't speak at first, then he placed the photo on her desk. She looked up, their eyes met, no words were needed. Rick whispered, "I'm so sorry for everything. I didn't know your story, but now I do, and I'll spend every day trying to honor what you taught me." Evelyn nodded slowly. "That's why I gave you a second chance, Rick, not because you deserved it, but because someone once deserved it and never got it." A new mission begins. A few weeks later, Rick stood in front of a crowd. He wore a clean suit. Behind him was a new sign, Second Light Foundation. Led by Rick Coleman and Evelyn Hart, they were launching a new program to train officers, guards, and staff to treat every person with dignity no matter their background. Rick looked around the crowd. Andre was there. Carla smiled proudly. Miss Tanya from the shelter sat in the front row. Rick took a deep breath and said, "Once I thought respect was something people had to earn. Now I know. It's something you give first. Because behind every face is a story, and if you take time to listen, you just might change the world." Final scene. Full circle outside the building. Rick saw a woman struggling with her ID at the entrance. The guard frowned, but Rick stepped forward. He smiled and said, "Let me help you with that." She looked surprised. He opened the door for her and nodded. "You're welcome here." As the door closed behind them, the camera would zoom out, revealing the words on the wall. Kindness is power. Respect is the beginning.